I pulled into my parents' driveway around 1:00 a.m. The house was dark, but the porch light was on. Mom must have left it lit for me. Exhaustion weighed on me like a lead vest, yet curiosity and apprehension over those texts churned in my stomach. Inside, the warmth hit me instantly, a cozy, familiar feeling. There was a platter of cookies on the kitchen table, a note from Mom in neat cursive. "Nick, welcome home, honey. There's a plate of lasagna in the fridge. Eat something before you sleep." I couldn't help but grin at that. Typical mom move. She worried about my nutrition like I was still 15. But that feeling of comfort was fleeting, replaced by an itch at the back of my mind to figure out what all those messages were about. I grabbed the lasagna, warmed it in the microwave, and settled down at the table. The single overhead light cast a small circular glow. In that moment, it was just me, the hum of the microwave, and the echo of the texts on my phone. I took a bite of lasagna, relishing the real taste of home-cooked food, then opened my phone. The battery was low, so I plugged it into a nearby charger. The messages were unrelenting. From Kevin, "Dude, big news, Carla and I are getting married in October. Need your help. Give me a call." Another from Aunt Barb, "Heard you're back soon. We want to talk about the wedding budget. Call me tonight or tomorrow morning." A voice message from Uncle Ron, "Nick, I know you've been away, but we'd really appreciate your support. Call me." And then one from Carla, which made my blood pressure spike. "You're so used to sacrifice anyway, soldier boy. A bit more won't hurt, right? We need the funds for our big day. We know you've got that deployment pay coming in. Let's talk soon." I nearly choked on my food. My eyes scanned the words again, making sure I wasn't hallucinating from fatigue. The entitlement dripped from every line. They were basically telling me that because I'm a soldier, I should be used to giving up everything for other people. So obviously, I should hand over my hard-earned deployment pay to fund someone else's wedding. A wedding I never even knew about until now. The arrogance of that text made my skin prickle. But I was too exhausted to respond. My body craved sleep. My mind, battered from months in a combat zone, simply couldn't muster the energy to call them back. So I clicked off my phone, finished the lasagna, and trudged upstairs to my old bedroom. The bed was just like I'd left it, but the sheets were fresh, and my mother had placed a small vase of flowers on the dresser. Despite the swirl of thoughts, I collapsed face first onto the mattress and instantly sank into the black void of dreamless sleep. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the curtains, and I squinted against its brightness. It was late morning, maybe 10:00 a.m. I had slept like a log. As I sat up, yawning, the events of the previous night came flooding back. I grabbed my phone to check the time. More messages. Great. Mom had left for work. She'd retired from her old job, but she volunteered at a local community center. Dad was probably out in the back shed, tinkering with something or other. He'd turned into quite the handyman after his own retirement. I scrolled through the new messages. One from Carla, "Hey, family is everything, right? Call me." One from Kevin, "We have the perfect venue, but it's pricey. We know you can help. Carla's family can only do so much. Please support your cousin." I felt my blood boil. They were doubling down. I noticed that not one of those messages asked how I was feeling or how my deployment went. They didn't ask if I was okay, if I needed anything after a grueling year in a conflict zone. None of that. They were laser-focused on money. I headed downstairs, found a pot of coffee warming in the kitchen, and filled a mug. The aroma perked me up, but so did my anger. Holding the hot mug, I decided to call Kevin directly. We were cousins, a couple of years apart, and used to be close when we were kids. But as adults, we drifted. He had gone into real estate, I joined the military. We exchanged pleasantries on holidays. That was about it. Now, all of a sudden, he was blowing up my phone, playing the family card for his wedding. The phone rang a few times before a groggy voice answered. "Hey, Nick. Good to hear from you," Kevin said, yawning. My stomach twisted. "Yeah, hey. I got your messages. Want to tell me what this is all about?" He cleared his throat. "Well, Carla and I are getting married in October. It's going to be a big family event, and we want it to be special. We were just thinking, since you've been deployed, you must have a good chunk of money saved up, right? Maybe you could chip in for the venue or the catering. Carla's family can't cover it all. And, you're my cousin. We're family. I wanted to see if I'd misheard. So, you're basically expecting me to pay for your wedding because I'm in the army? Well, Kevin said, hesitating, it's not just because you're in the army, but we all know soldiers get decent deployment pay, especially if you've been in a combat zone. You have benefits, hazard pay, all that. We thought, hey, you're used to sacrifice already, and this is for the family. It's not a random request. I clenched my jaw. Dude, do you realize how insulting that sounds? I risk my life overseas, come back with mental and physical scars, and the first thing you say is, hand over your money because you're used to giving up everything anyway? He sighed. Come on, Nick. Don't be so dramatic. I mean, we're just talking about some extra cash. It'll help out a lot. I took a long breath, trying to keep my voice level. So the fact that I served and that I've been sacrificing everything for a year gives you the right to my savings. Kevin hesitated again. It's not like we're forcing you or anything. But the family's been talking about it and we think it's reasonable. You're not married, you don't have kids, so what else do you need that money for? That felt like a punch to the gut. I was stunned by his lack of empathy. Wow, I said, my voice cracking with anger. Let me guess, Aunt Barb and Uncle Ron are on board with this too? Everyone is, Nick. They've all been talking about how it makes sense. We'd all benefit from a huge family wedding. You'll be the hero once again, just like you are on the battlefield, he added, almost mockingly. I swallowed hard. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the answer is no. My deployment pay is for my needs, paying off debts. Maybe buying a small place, definitely not funding a wedding that I had no part in planning. Kevin's tone turned icy. Then maybe you should talk to the rest of the family before you decide, because they're counting on you. Don't let them down, Nick. He hung up before I could respond. My blood felt hot in my veins. I took a deep swallow of coffee, but the bitterness on my tongue matched the bitterness in my heart. Counting on me? They had no right. A swirl of anger, betrayal, and disappointment roiled in my gut. Family was supposed to be about caring for each other, supporting one another, but this was extortion. Plain and simple. I decided I needed to cool off. I changed into running clothes and went for a long jog through the neighborhood. The morning sun was bright, the air crisp. I ran past the old high school, the library, the corner store that still displayed a Support Our Troops sign in the window. That sign struck me. The community here was always supportive. They welcomed me back with open arms. So why was my own flesh and blood acting like I was some cash cow? Days passed. I tried to settle back into civilian life, visiting my folks, meeting old friends for a beer, and slowly unpacking the mental baggage from the deployment. But the texts and calls from relatives didn't stop. Aunt Barb left me voicemails laced with guilt trips about doing the right thing. Uncle Ron texted me paragraphs about how family should stick together, implying that my refusal was a betrayal. Even my grandmother chimed in at one point, leaving a shaky voicemail. Nicholas, dear, your cousin's wedding is a blessing for the whole family. We'd all be so grateful if you helped. She meant well, she always did, but I knew she was being fed lines by Aunt Barb and Carla. I also started receiving messages from Carla's side of the family, people I barely knew, praising my honorable service and suggesting that if I could sacrifice for my country, I could sacrifice for family celebrations too. It was infuriating how they twisted my sense of duty into a financial obligation. Eventually, I confronted my parents about it. They were furious at the rest of the family. Dad's hands balled into fists when I told him about Carla's text. That is outrageous, he growled. I'll have a word with them myself. Mom shook her head in disgust. I never thought your Aunt Barb and Uncle Ron would stoop so low. I mean, we all chipped in for your older cousin's wedding, but it was voluntary, and no one singled you out like this. This is madness. Their support lifted a weight off my chest. At least my parents understood I wasn't some walking ATM. Dad actually picked up the phone and called Aunt Barb, gave her a piece of his mind. I only heard his side of the conversation, but the phrases "he's not your piggy bank" and "he's done enough" echoed through the house. It made me feel a mixture of relief and gratitude, but also guilt, because I knew Dad's efforts wouldn't stop them from harassing me. Sure enough, the harassment continued. A few days later, Aunt Barb decided to up the ante. She showed up at our door unannounced. I was sitting in the living room, trying to unwind by watching a baseball game, when I heard loud voices in the hallway. I turned off the TV and found Aunt Barb standing there, her face flushed with anger, my dad standing firm with folded arms. "Nick needs to listen to reason," Aunt Barb said, jabbing a finger in the air. "He's part of this family." Dad shook his head. "Stop, Barb. You have no right." She caught sight of me and pushed past Dad. "Nicholas, why are you being so stubborn? This wedding is for the entire family. Don't you want to see Kevin happy?" I crossed my arms, feeling my pulse quicken. Of course I want Kevin to be happy. But that doesn't mean I'm paying for his wedding. She rolled her eyes. "Stop being so dramatic. You're not paying for the entire wedding, just a portion. All we're asking is that you cover the venue deposit. Maybe the honeymoon flights. It's not much, not for a soldier who's been deployed." I couldn't contain my frustration. "Aunt Barb, you have no idea what my finances look like. Just because I've been deployed doesn't mean I'm rolling in cash. And even if I was, it's my money. I have every right to say no." Her lips curled. "Then you're just going to let this wedding fall apart? If we can't secure the deposit, they'll lose the venue. Kevin and Carla have their hearts set on it." My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to tell her about the nightmares, the sleepless nights, the grueling missions where I lost friends. I wanted to scream that I had paid enough both physically and mentally, and that every dollar of that deployment pay was earned through sweat, tears, and the constant threat of losing my life. But I didn't. I just looked her in the eye and said, "I'm sorry, Aunt Barb, but the answer is no." She let out a frustrated huff. "You're being selfish. After all the family has done for you," Dad cut in, voice rumbling, "you better watch your words, Barb. That's my son you're talking to, and he's done more for this country than you can fathom." Her face twisted with anger, but she turned and stomped out of the house. As the door slammed, I felt a twinge of sadness behind the anger. This was my aunt, the woman who used to bake me cookies and take me to the park when I was little. Now she was acting like a vulture, circling around my bank account. News spread quickly through the family grapevine that I was refusing to pay. Now, the accusations grew more personal. How can a soldier who's supposed to serve and protect turn his back on family? Or he might wear the uniform, but he clearly doesn't embody the spirit of generosity the military teaches. They started calling me Unpatriotic me, a combat veteran who had just returned from a dangerous mission. The irony stung like a hornet. The phone calls and texts turned into heated discussions on social media. My cousin Carla took to posting passive-aggressive statuses like, "Some people wear a uniform but only care about themselves," with a little American flag emoji to twist the knife. I tried to ignore it at first, but it gnawed at my sanity. Friends from my unit saw these posts and reached out confused. They knew the sacrifices I had made. A couple even wanted to jump in and defend me, but I told them not to stoop to that level. My personal struggles were enough without dragging my buddies into a family feud. Meanwhile, Kevin started sending me spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets of wedding expenses. He highlighted the most pressing costs in red, as if that would guilt me into covering them. Venue deposit, catering, photographer, honeymoon flights, Carla's designer dress. Everything was itemized, each with a note, "Nick can help with this." My mental health spiraled. I'd return from a run or a quiet moment in the backyard, only to find more messages, relentless, intrusive demands. Sleep became harder to come by. I relived the tension of my deployment at night, tossing and turning. My therapist at the VA had encouraged me to focus on rest, on stability upon coming home, but my family was making it nearly impossible. I felt alone, isolated, except for my parents' unwavering support. I also confided in my friend James, a fellow soldier who'd served with me. He'd come home 6 months earlier and understood what it was like to transition back to normal life. We met at a local bar, sipping on cold beers, and I vented all my frustrations. James shook his head in disbelief. "They're basically extorting you, man. That's insane." I shrugged miserably. "They see me as some sort of hero with bottomless pockets, but I'm just a regular guy. I have medical bills. I need to find a job, maybe enroll in some courses. My life is just as uncertain as anyone's." He clapped me on the shoulder. "Don't give in, Nick. Don't let them manipulate you. Focus on your future. If they really loved you, they'd understand. I wished I could make the rest of my family see that truth." My final straw came when Carla decided to take the feud to my commanding officer. Yes, somehow, she found his public contact information through social media. She sent him a long message, accusing me of failing to uphold the Army values of loyalty and selfless service. She twisted everything into a ridiculous narrative that I had a moral duty, as a soldier, to pay for a family event. It was an attempt to embarrass me at my place of work. She insinuated that if my CO knew how selfish I was, maybe I'd be reprimanded. Thankfully, my CO was a reasonable man. He called me into his office, gently closed the door, and showed me Carla's message. The frustration in his eyes was evident, but so was the sympathy. "Nick, I'm sorry you have to deal with this," he said, shaking his head. "This is a personal family matter, and we certainly don't intervene in personal financial disputes. I won't be responding to her, but I wanted you to know she's trying to escalate this." My face burned with shame. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because my own relatives were humiliating me in front of my commanding officer. "I understand, sir. I didn't realize she'd try this route. I apologize." He waved a hand dismissively. "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything. Go handle your personal affairs. If you need time off or additional resources from our side, let me know." I left his office feeling numb. I sat in my car for a long while, the engine off, staring at the steering wheel, as a swirl of anger and hurt threatened to overwhelm me. That was the moment something broke inside me. I knew then that this wasn't just a small family spat. They were actively trying to ruin my reputation, my career, just because I wouldn't pay for a wedding. It was time for a turning point. I had to set boundaries, real ones. And if they crossed them, there would be consequences. My mind, hardened by the experiences overseas, started clicking into a methodical mode. I'd spent time diffusing tense situations in war zones. I'd studied negotiation tactics, learned how to read a room, and plan an operation. Maybe I could apply some of those skills here. First, I called my aunt, uncle, Kevin, and Carla. None of them answered. I wasn't surprised. They probably anticipated a confrontation. Instead of leaving voicemails, I sent a single group text to the members of my family who believe I owe them money for the wedding. "I have reached my limit. Your demands are unreasonable, and your harassment is intolerable. If you continue, I will take legal and personal measures to protect myself. I am done discussing my finances with you. Do not contact my workplace again, and do not expect a penny. Your behavior is not only disrespectful, but also deeply hurtful. Any further attempts to involve others in this harassment will be documented and addressed accordingly. Sincerely, Nick." I felt a small spark of victory upon sending that text. It was a clear boundary, something I should have done weeks ago. I didn't expect them to respect it, but at least I had spelled it out. If they crossed that line again, I could look into restraining orders, cease and desist letters, whatever it took. Sure enough, the texts came immediately. From Carla, "How dare you threaten us? Family doesn't send legal threats." From Kevin, "Real nice, Nick. I guess you learned intimidation in the Army." I ignored them. My phone buzzed a few more times, then fell silent. I exhaled, feeling the tension coil inside me, but at least I'd drawn my line in the sand. Days passed in relative peace. I kept busy, attended therapy, worked out, and helped my dad with chores around the house. My parents continued to check on me. They worried I might snap under the stress. But slowly, I started to feel a sense of control. I reminded myself that in the Army, we manage chaos through discipline and procedure. I could do the same in my personal life. A week later, I came home from a therapy session to find a letter in our mailbox. The return address was from a lawyer's office unfamiliar. My heart thumped as I opened it. The letter stated that Kevin and Carla were seeking damages because my refusal to pay had caused them to lose their original wedding venue. They alleged that I had verbally committed to sponsoring a significant portion of the costs, and because I withdrew support, they faced cancellation fees and emotional distress. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Emotional distress? They tried to claim I had promised them money, which was a bald-faced lie. This was so far beyond the pale that it felt like a sick joke. But it wasn't. It was real. They'd hired a lawyer at least. They'd paid for a consultation. The letter demanded a sum of money to cover their losses and threatened legal action if I did not comply. Mom found me standing in the hallway, letter in hand, eyes blazing with anger. "Nick, what is it?" she asked gently. I handed it to her. She read it, jaw dropping in disbelief. Are they insane? They can't seriously think they have a case. I rubbed my temples. This is harassment, Mom. They're just trying to bully me into paying. I need to show this to an actual attorney. Dad walked in, saw our faces, and grabbed the letter. He read it, then crumpled it in his fist. This is nonsense. Let me call your Uncle Ron right now. Don't, I said. That'll just escalate it. I'll handle this through proper channels. I'll consult a lawyer and see what they say. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney the very next day. I brought copies of all the texts and voicemails. My attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Lisa, flipped through them, raising her eyebrows at Carla's. "You're used to sacrifice. Soldier boy message." She shook her head. "I've seen petty family lawsuits, but this is a new low. Rest assured, they have no case. There's no written contract, no enforceable agreement. It's a baseless harassment tactic. We'll draft a letter in response, telling them to cease and desist all communication. If they continue, we can file a harassment claim." I exhaled in relief. "Thank you." Her expression softened. "I'm sorry you're going through this. You'd think they'd be proud of you for your service, not trying to extort you." I gave a hollow laugh. "Tell me about it." With Lisa's help, I sent a formal cease and desist. I felt my heart pounding, half from anxiety, half from a grim sense of determination. If they wanted to turn this into a legal battle, I was ready to see it through. I'd never felt so betrayed in my life, but I refused to give in. Some people might say revenge is not the best path, but the sense of injustice burning inside me didn't let me settle for a simple cease and desist. They'd tried to tarnish my reputation at work, and now they were slapping me with frivolous legal threats. I wanted them to understand, once and for all, that I wasn't just going to roll over. I started gathering everything, every humiliating post, every nasty text, every voicemail. I saved screenshots of Carla's smear campaign on social media. I compiled a timeline of events showing how they escalated from polite request to public shaming to outright legal harassment. Then I realized there might be a more direct way to get them to back off. You see, Carla's father runs a local construction company. He's well known for cutting corners on permits and not always adhering to building codes. It's a small town, and rumors float around that he has out-of-state workers who aren't legally documented, paying them under the table. I'd heard bits and pieces over the years, though I never had any reason to dig deeper. Until now. Admittedly, it wasn't my style to do something underhanded, but the way they weaponized my own service and tried to sabotage my career lit a fuse inside me. So I reached out to an acquaintance from high school, Eddie, who now worked at the local council in the permits department. We grabbed coffee, caught up, and I casually steered the conversation toward Carla's father's company. I expressed concern about some of his projects. Eddie gave me a cautious look and confirmed that there had been numerous complaints about code violations and possible labor law breaches. I explained my situation, told him how Carla's father was harassing me through his daughter's wedding fiasco, and mentioned I suspected more foul play in his business. Eddie didn't promise anything, but he said he'd look into it. If there was enough evidence of wrongdoing, the city inspectors might pay a visit. If they found repeated or major violations, Carla's father could face fines. Or worse. It was a calculated risk. If it failed, they'd know I was behind it. But at this point, I felt cornered by their relentless attacks. I wasn't looking for money, I just wanted them to know I could and would defend myself, even if it meant exposing their dirty laundry. They wanted to exploit my role as a soldier for personal gain. Fine. Let them see what it feels like to have the spotlight turned on them. August rolled around, and my grandmother planned a small family picnic, one of her annual traditions. She insisted I come. I hesitated, worried about the tension, but she gave me those teary grandmother eyes and said it wouldn't feel right if I wasn't there. Reluctantly, I agreed, mainly for her sake. The day was hot, the sun relentless. We all gathered at a local park with a covered pavilion. A long table was filled with homemade dishes, and cousins milled about. I spotted Kevin and Carla standing off to the side, glaring at me as soon as I arrived. Aunt Barb and Uncle Ron were there, eyeing me with contempt. My parents stuck close, as if forming a protective barrier around me. Despite the tension, Grandma greeted me with a warm hug. "Nicholas, my dear, thank you for coming," she whispered, patting my arm. She guided me to a seat next to her, forcing Aunt Barb to shuffle over. We sat down to eat. Conversation was stilted, with people trying to avoid the elephant in the room. Eventually, the elephant trampled its way into the spotlight. Carla slammed her plastic cup on the table, attracting everyone's attention. "Nick," she said in a high-pitched tone, "aren't you going to apologize to the family for the harm you've caused?" My parents bristled. I held up a hand, indicating that I'd handle this. "Carla, I have nothing to apologize for. I was never responsible for your wedding finances. You all decided that on your own." Kevin jumped in. "You made us lose the venue, man. We couldn't pay the deposit in time because we were counting on you to cover that portion." I leaned back, keeping my voice cool. "That's your assumption. I never agreed to it. And now you've tried to sue me, threatened my career, and smeared my name. Don't you think that's going too far?" Aunt Barb's cheeks turned red. "You have no idea what it's like trying to plan a wedding these days. It's expensive." My dad piped up. "That's not Nick's responsibility. Get a smaller venue or push the date back if you can't afford it." Uncle Ron muttered something under his breath, then spoke up louder. "Nick's the one who got a bunch of hazard pay. It's not like he's struggling. Why can't he share with the rest of us?" I snapped, finally letting some of my anger show. "Because it's my money, earned under conditions you can't even begin to imagine. Why are all of you so entitled to it?" Silence fell like a heavy blanket. I glanced around. Cousins and in-laws shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to mind their own business, picking at their potato salad, but the confrontation had everyone on edge. Grandma looked distraught, tears glistening in her eyes. Carla sneered. "You're just selfish. You put on a uniform and go off to war, and now you think you're some untouchable hero. Well, guess what? Hero? Family is supposed to share what they have." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to maintain composure. Family also respects boundaries. "I have been harassed and defamed. You even contacted my commanding officer. You think that's acceptable?" Kevin shifted uneasily. "We were just trying to apply some pressure." I nodded slowly. "So you admit it was all a pressure tactic?" "That's harassment, Kevin. And trying to drag my job into this crosses a serious line," Aunt Barb interjected. "You threatened legal action against us. You threatened to expose Carla's father's construction business for some rumored violations. That's not exactly innocent behavior, Nick." I stared at her, my anger flaring. So they knew I was digging around, which meant Carla's father must have caught wind of city inspections looming. Good. Let them fear it. I told you not to harass me anymore. You didn't listen. If you come after me, I will defend myself. Grandma finally found her voice. She pushed away her plate, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Stop it, all of you. This isn't how a family acts. I can't bear this fighting. Nicholas, can't you just help a little? And Barb, Kevin, you must understand that it's his choice. We shouldn't force him, Carla scoffed. It's too late for that. We've had to downgrade the wedding now thanks to Nick's betrayal. That word betrayal lit a spark behind my eyes. I stood up, the bench scraping against the concrete. I've had enough of this. Let's get one thing straight. I have done nothing but serve my country and come home to rebuild my life. I owe you nothing, and if you continue to smear my name, I will make sure you regret it. This ends now. With that, I turned and walked away. My parents followed, my dad placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Grandma called after me, sobbing. A pang of guilt twisted in my chest. I hated seeing her like that, but I couldn't continue this farce. Enough was enough. After the disastrous picnic, my attorney filed the formal response to Kevin and Carla's lawyer. It was a thorough document, pointing out that there was no legal contract, no binding verbal agreement, and that their claims of emotional distress were baseless. It also highlighted their harassment tactics. That was the official route. On the unofficial side, I heard through Eddie that the city inspectors had indeed visited some of Carla's father's construction sites. Rumor had it they found several glaring violations. Fines were on the horizon. The family drama kicked up another notch. Carla's father was enraged. He knew I had connections in town, but couldn't prove I'd triggered the inspections. He threatened me indirectly through social media posts, calling me a meddling soldier who doesn't know his place. Meanwhile, Kevin and Carla lashed out, saying their wedding was now overshadowed by her father's legal problems. They blamed me for everything, still ignoring the fact that they had started this war. But a strange thing happened. As the days turned into weeks, some relatives who initially sided with Kevin and Carla began expressing doubts. They saw how unhinged and vindictive the couple had become. A few aunts reached out to me privately, apologizing for their earlier support of Kevin's demands. They admitted they'd been swept up in the excitement of a big family wedding without really thinking about the ethics of forcing me to pay. I felt a measure of relief that not everyone in the extended family was delusional. Still, the damage was done. I wondered if the rift could ever be healed. September arrived. One evening, I was nursing a beer on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky with streaks of orange and pink, when my phone vibrated. It was Kevin. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey," he said. His voice was subdued, lacking the usual arrogance. "Hello," I replied curtly. There was a pause. "Look, I wanted to apologize for how things went down. Maybe we went too far." A flurry of emotions zipped through me: anger, suspicion, a faint flicker of hope. "Why the change of heart now?" He let out a breath. "The wedding is next month, and everything's kind of falling apart. Carla's father is dealing with the construction violations, money is tight, and we're not able to have the wedding we dreamed of. I feel like we messed up by pinning all our hopes on you." I stared out at the yard, gripping the phone. "Kevin, you didn't just pin hopes on me, you harassed me, tried to sabotage my career, and served me legal threats. That's more than a small mistake." He sighed. "Yeah, I know. Carla and I got carried away. We were stressed about finances, and then we rationalized that you owed us. I see now it was wrong. We shouldn't have done that." I stayed silent, not sure if I should believe him. "I'm not expecting you to help with anything now," Kevin added. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For real. I hope you can at least come to the wedding, even if it's scaled down. Family is family, right?" Something in me softened a fraction, though I was still wary. "Kevin, I've never wanted bad things for you. I was just defending myself. If you and Carla are truly sorry, that's a start. But you can't expect me to just show up and pretend none of this happened." He sounded miserable. "I get it, I do. But I had to try. We don't want to cut you out entirely." "Let me think about it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need time." We hung up. I stared at the phone, feeling the old mix of betrayal and love that family feuds always stir up. A part of me wanted to accept his apology, attend the wedding, and let the healing begin. Another part remembered the lengths they went to, the insults, the legal threats, the attempt to ruin my name at work. One decided to sleep on it. A week later, I received a formal notice from their lawyer, stating they were withdrawing all claims against me. Their attempt to sue had officially fizzled. My attorney responded with a note acknowledging the withdrawal. I breathed a sigh of relief, thankful that at least the legal side of things was closed. But I could tell from social media that the wedding planning was in chaos. Carla had posted cryptic messages about financial setbacks and unsupportive family members. The date was fast approaching. Finally, 2 weeks before the wedding, Kevin called again. He said he and Carla had scaled the event down to a small ceremony at a modest venue, just close friends and family. They wanted me to come, insisted there'd be no more demands for money, no more hostility. Their families would stand down. Kevin even assured me that Carla's father would keep his distance. They just wanted a semblance of peace. I had a choice to make. I could skip the wedding, hold on to the resentment, and create a permanent rift. Or I could attend, be the bigger person, and see if peace was truly possible. If they tried anything else, I could walk away for good. Mom and Dad said they'd support me either way. Dad was still furious at the entire fiasco, but he also believed in giving people a chance to make amends. Mom was worried about more drama unfolding at the ceremony. James, my buddy from the army, suggested I go, but keep your radar up. He reminded me that sometimes closure comes from facing the people who wronged you. He also offered to be my +1, though that might have been just to watch the fireworks if things got heated. I laughed at the idea, but politely declined. If I was going to do this, I'd go on my own terms. The night before the wedding, I hardly slept. Memories of Carla's cutting words, Aunt Barb's intrusion, the meltdown at the family picnic, all of it replayed in my head. But beneath that, I also remembered Kevin as a kid, how we used to play catch in the backyard and explore the woods behind Grandma's house. It was difficult to reconcile that cousin with the adult who tried to extort me. Morning came, and I decided to go. I put on a simple suit, combed my hair, and drove to the small chapel on the outskirts of town. My heart pounded as I pulled into the gravel parking lot. A modest sign out front read, "Kevin and Carla today." A few cars were parked haphazardly. Not nearly the grand affair Carla once boasted about. I stepped out into the crisp air, inhaled deeply, and approached the chapel doors. My plan was to slip in, sit in the back, and see how things went. If at any point it felt toxic, I'd leave. I had no illusions about overnight forgiveness. But maybe, just maybe, we could end this war. Inside, the chapel was sparsely decorated with simple flowers. A soft organ played in the background. A handful of guests were seated, some unfamiliar faces, likely Carla's friends. In the front row, I recognized Aunt Barb, Uncle Ron, and a few cousins. Carla's father was off to the side, jaw tight. When he spotted me, his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. I found a seat in the last row. My parents were there, nodding to me with a mix of support and caution. Kevin stood at the altar, wearing a budget tux, looking anxious. Carla emerged a few moments later, wearing a simple white dress, not the designer gown she had once demanded. She noticed me, her expression a flicker of surprise. Then she quickly looked away. The ceremony began, short and straightforward. Vows were exchanged. Carla's voice wavered, tears rolling down her cheeks, whether from genuine emotion or residual stress. I couldn't tell. Kevin barely looked at me. I wasn't sure if he felt guilt or relief. The officiant declared them husband and wife, and polite applause followed. I joined in, clapping softly. It was surreal, witnessing this moment after all the drama. As the guests rose to leave, I lingered near the back. My parents stayed close. I was tempted to slip out, but Kevin locked eyes with me, then headed in my direction, Carla trailing behind. "Nick," he said, voice low. "I'm glad you came." Carla didn't speak, just stared at the floor. I nodded, keeping my guard up. "I came because I wanted to see if you were sincere about mending fences. I'm still hurt by everything that happened." Carla finally looked up, eyes red. "I know you probably hate me. I got caught up in the idea of a fairy tale wedding, and I saw your money as a quick fix. It was stupid and selfish. I'm sorry for everything, especially for contacting your commanding officer." She seemed genuine, though I sensed a heavy load of shame in her posture. Kevin sighed. If there's anything we can do to start fixing this, let us know. I glanced at Carla's father a few feet away, scowling. You can begin by making sure no one in your family ever harasses me again. My service, my finances, and my life are off limits for your demands. Carla nodded slowly. I understand. I studied her face, remembering the venom in her texts. She looked deflated, worn down by the consequences of her actions. Part of me felt a stab of pity. Another part wondered if she was only acting sorry because she lost her dream wedding and her father got busted for code violations. But as I stood there, I realized maybe it didn't matter. They were apologizing now. That was a step. Holding on to rage forever would poison me. I swallowed, forcing the tension from my voice. I don't hate either of you, but trust is something that has to be rebuilt over time. We can start with civility. A faint smile tugged at Kevin's lips. Yeah, civility. I'll take it. We shook hands, a tentative gesture. Carla gave me a small hug, which I awkwardly endured. Then I turned and walked away. My parents followed me out. The sun was bright, the day warm. I felt lighter, yet still cautious. But I'd taken a step toward closure. The weeks that followed were surprisingly quiet. No more harassing texts, no more demands for money. I heard through the grapevine that Carla's father paid hefty fines and was forced to update several construction sites. Kevin and Carla settled into married life, on a tight budget but seemingly contrite about their previous behavior. Aunt Barb and Uncle Ron backed off, though they maintained a frosty distance. My grandmother, relieved that the feud was cooling, tried to host more family gatherings, but attendance was spotty. I returned to base a few months later, continuing my service while planning my next steps, maybe re-enlisting for another term, maybe going to college on the GI Bill. My days felt more stable. Therapy was helping me process not just the stress of combat, but the emotional toll of family betrayal. I realized that part of my healing involved letting go of the anger, at least enough to function peacefully. Then one day, out of the blue, I received a small card in the mail. It was from Kevin and Carla. Inside was a short note, Nick. Thank you for attending our wedding. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness yet, but we hope one day we can rebuild our relationship. We appreciate the second chance you gave us by showing up. We wish you the best in everything. Kevin and Carla, I set the card down, unsure how to feel. A mix of relief and residual hurt filled my chest, but a sense of warmth was there too. Maybe people do change, especially after realizing the harm they've caused. Over time, the family began to repair itself in small ways. Kevin and Carla eventually invited me to a modest barbecue at their new place. I went, carefully, bringing James along for moral support. The atmosphere was tense at first, but no one mentioned money or the wedding fiasco. Instead, we talked about normal things: sports, the weather, my future plans. It felt almost normal, a cautious truce. It might never be perfect, and I would never forget how they tried to exploit me. But at least we were moving forward, with mutual respect slowly forming where entitlement once loomed. Months turned into a year. The tension dissipated like morning fog. Carla's father still kept his distance, likely bitter about the fines he had to pay. But Kevin and Carla began to rebuild trust with me through small gestures, checking in on my well-being, showing interest in my service, and, crucially, never asking about my finances again. Aunt Barb and Uncle Ron eventually invited me over for the holidays, offering a quiet apology over coffee in their living room. They admitted they'd become blinded by the idea of a grand wedding and latched onto my deployment. Pay as a solution, not caring about how unfair it was to me. I accepted their apology with the caveat that our relationship would need time to heal. Despite the scars and lingering caution, I found myself smiling more often. I had faced a painful betrayal, but I'd also found my own voice, set firm boundaries, and refused to be used as a doormat. I reconnected with my purpose, both in serving my country and caring for my own dreams. No longer was I haunted by the feeling that I owed everyone everything just because I was a soldier. One crisp autumn evening, as I prepared to redeploy for another assignment, I visited my grandmother. She hugged me tight, tears in her eyes, telling me how proud she was. She apologized for not doing more to defend me during the whole wedding incident. I told her not to worry, time had a way of teaching everyone lessons. We sat on her porch sipping tea, watching the leaves drift from the trees. In that peaceful moment, I knew I'd found some measure of closure. If there's a moral to this story, it's that even family can turn against you in moments of greed or desperation, but family, given the chance and enough remorse, can also find its way back to each other. Though the scars of betrayal never fully fade, the wounds can heal over if both sides are willing to do the work. For me, the experience was as harrowing in its own way as any battlefield, rife with emotional landmines and sabotage. But I navigated it, stood my ground, and emerged with my dignity intact and, surprisingly, with a cautious but real hope for reconciliation. In the end, the revenge wasn't about hurting them back. It was about protecting myself and forcing them to confront their own wrongdoing. And that, I realized, was a far more powerful outcome than any act of vengeance could be. So I packed my bags for my next deployment, feeling a lighter heart than before. The entanglements of the wedding fiasco were behind me, replaced by cautious goodwill and genuine apologies. Life was complicated, but it was also moving forward, and for the first time in a while, I felt a spark of optimism. I had reclaimed my narrative, no longer the soldier coerced into giving everything up for someone else's benefit, but a man with agency, pride, and a future filled with possibilities.